Hello, everyone. I am one of your regularly scheduled Open Rewrite Community Office Hours hosts, Sam Snyder, and I am joined here today by the original creator of the Open Rewrite refactoring technology and co-founder, and CEO of Moderne, Jonathan Schneider. He's got some really cool stuff to show us today, but before we get right to that, I'm going to show off some of our upcoming events. So there we go. That was better. So coming up, I believe tomorrow at Spring IO is Tim Tabik's presentation, which I encourage you to check out. All of you who are regular watchers of this community office hour stream are well familiar with Tim. So if you're going to be at Spring IO, definitely check out his presentation. And whether or not you're going to be at Spring IO, his portrait on the page has this fun little code effect when you mouse over it. I really enjoy that. So that's fun to play with whether or not you're attending.
So go play with Tim's face.
Yeah,
That's the call to action here.
it looks better with some green code scrolling over it. Doesn't he look like an
Right.
amazing developer like this?
Yeah,
Man, he
really
codes so
does.
fast.
Yeah.
We need to give Tim a raise based on the green code scrolling
right.
over his face. And then if that isn't enough Tim for you, and how could it be? We all need more Tim Tabik in our lives. He has at J Nation on Wednesday. I guess is that. Let me just check. Oops. On Wednesday of, is it this week or next week, he will be giving a workshop on the fundamentals of migration engineering with Open Rewrite at J Nation. So if you are a J Nation attendee, be sure to check that out. On this, if you can't make it to J Nation, or if you can and want even more, you can check out my presentation on a very similar subject this Friday on the fundamentals of on migration engineering with Open Rewrite. And if after watching today's video you want similar content in a textual form, we have this blog post about IDE integration you can check out, as well as this video clip showing off some of the same stuff, possibly suitable for sharing if you are very excited about the stuff we're talking about today and want to share that content in a more digestible, textual or 6-minute video form with anyone who might be interested. So, without further ado, let's get into it, Jonathan. What have you cooked up for us in terms of IDE integration for Moderne and Open Rewrite?
Yeah, I think a little bit of background. I think you've been showing. So anybody familiar with Open Rewrite knows with the build tool plugin, you can run a command to do rewrite run, which fixes any given repository on one machine. A big part of our goal and company has been to create this data warehouse for code where you can execute that recipe on hundreds or thousands of repositories or tens of thousands of repositories in a single tenant SaaS. So when we introduce Dev Center and different things like that, that normally means you're going to some UI to run a recipe, right? And you're from that UI, you're reviewing changes and you're making commits and so forth. And I think as we've been, going around working with, especially a lot of larger enterprises, and just seeing their first experiences with writing recipes and running recipes, one of the first things we always do going into a completely new environment is to take a developer that has a number of repositories on their machine and do, using the Moderne CLI, do a mod build. And mod build will decide what the Java version and what the build version is, what what build tools in use and so forth. Do a matching exercise with the tools available on that machine, and it'll produce an LST and serialize it to that folder. And so at the end of that mod build step, they have a series of lossless semantic tree artifacts on disk, and then they can just run recipes and do impact analyses, produce Excel spreadsheets, whatever. That's the goodness of that. And that's when people start really getting excited, when they are able to execute that first recipe on multiple or many repositories.
Mm-hmm.
The next step in the evolution is always to publish those LSTs as some artifact repository. And then we actually make that a regular scheduled process. So they could select 60,000 repositories, build them as LSTs, put them in their artifact repository, and then they create this organization structure. and the organization structure breaks down all those tens of thousands of repositories into multiple units of work.
Mhm.
This is a lot of background, but to say, if I wanted to just operate on some portion of the code,
Say you're an
I want to do
IC and you want
so.
to run on your team's
Yeah,
repositories, or a
yeah,
director who wants to run on all of your sub team's repositories.
that's right. That's right. Yeah. So if I go to the Moderne SaaS for a moment and look at let's just select this one tab
Do you
maybe.
want to share your screen?
Yeah, I'll share my screen. Um, so, I could be looking at 37,000 total projects in this, open source tenant app.moderne.io that we run for free. But this hierarchy represents, the way that we've broken down these 37,000 repositories into multiple, mock product teams like Netflix, Spring, and Apache. It's a bit contrived, but that contains Netflix and Spring, which contains Netflix and Spring. And so I may be a developer on just this Spring organization here, and I'm responsible for 103 repositories. That's the working set that I should care about.
Mhm.
So we've taken this and we've created Dev Center, which shows for the repositories I care about, how close am I to meeting different organizational initiatives and so forth, and all that's great. But I'm in the browser, right? I have to get here to the browser. So I think if I flip over to the IDE for a moment, I'm going to share a different screen now. What I'm trying to do is bring this information down to where I would normally work. So I'm going to look at an IDE here for a moment and go to. So there's a Moderne plugin on the JetBrains marketplace now. I'll go to you can see this Moderne plugin right here. And if I look at the Moderne settings now, I'm
It
able
looked
to
like an
select.
update was available for the Moderne plugin. Are you running
Yeah,
on the latest right now?
I actually am. It was a
Because
locally built copy,
you're
so
building
whatever.
from source, right? So the
Yeah,
version number
exactly.
might not match up.
Yeah,
Makes sense.
that's right. Yeah. So here you see the settings available. Really the IDE plugin is going to use the Moderne CLI to perform multi-repository operations and bring those results back into the IDE in really natural ways, we'll see here in a moment. So the first step really is to select a pre-installed and pre-configured Moderne CLI that's already on my machine, either that's on the path or that's just downloaded as a jar to some location on disk,
Hmm.
and get that working. And then down here, so we've got this concept called multi-repos, and it's kind of a nod. It's almost like the antithesis of monorepo, the recognition that in many environments, a product team is responsible for not just one repository, but many. And that in the IDE, typically I'm only seeing one repository at a time, or maybe I've got a few IDE windows open, but I'm only seeing a subset of my code.
Hmm.
So from here, I could actually select a Moderne organization. And if you look carefully at the structure here, since this Moderne CLI was configured to point at app.moderne.io, I'm actually seeing the structure, the same organizational structure I saw over there in the IDE. And so I'm going to select a Spring organization here. And effectively what that's going to do is create, it's going to clone using metadata only. So it's going to create a folder structure for each one of these 94 repositories somewhere on disk. In my case, that's here in the .moderne /CLI /organization /spring. That's the name of the organization. And you'll see I've got a folder for each one of these repositories.
Hmm.
And then it does a mod build
So,
on
question:
those repositories.
you use the term metadata clone. How does that relate to like a regular Git clone?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's what I was about to show. If I go into any one of these, so like let's say I go into Spring Native Data Neo4j, there's no data in it, right? I've created a folder, but I haven't actually done a Git clone. I've
Hmm.
created a .moderne folder, inside the .moderne folder, I've got a get.properties, and that get.properties actually just points to, the particular branch and change set and URI of a repository for an LST that I have an artifact repository. This is a lot to say right now. Ultimately, we're going to do a mod build, and because I haven't actually cloned the repository, the CLI will just download from my artifact repository an LST that's been pre-produced for these repositories. So that's kind of the experience we want for the product engineer at any given organization to have, is like, LST production is not my problem. That's centralized. I just select my organization. And when I do this refresh, when I clone those repositories using metadata only and build, the time to do that is kind of like resolving dependencies. It is actually in many ways resolving a dependency. It's pulling an LST jar down from my artifact repository to my machine. So now that I've got all of those, what could I do with it? I think, we're kind of getting to the meat of the issue here. The first thing is, in the IDE, we're used to seeing things like this, find usages, right? Where it's looking for that method in all places. What does all places mean? It's looking for it. Maybe it could be looking in the project and its libraries, and in Scratch files. So if I just look at it in project files, this is the default. I'm only going to find one result, right? Which is the one I'm actually looking at right here. This additional menu option, find usages on all repositories, gives me a few options, but we're going to start with this top one, run find recipe. And that's going to run it's effectively going to run the open rewrite find method usages recipe with the method pattern already filled out. And you can see it's running that on, all of these repositories here that we have a metadata clone for. And so results are going to start coming in incrementally as that recipe is running on each repository. So far we've seen results in a repository called Spring AI. We've seen results in a project called Spring AMQP. And I can open one of these. This is actually the system.out.println statement in a file called prompt tests that significantly I don't even have on my machine.
Yeah.
In
We
text.
already went and looked at the folder and
it.
saw that it was empty.
That's right. Yeah. So this information about this file is just coming out of the LST. It's coming from our ability to accurately identify println statements on, all of this code. And this will now be, you can see all these represent repositories. Normal find usages, you just see, my repository that's open in the IDE. Here you're seeing all these repositories that are not open in the IDE. And I'm able to see how this method is used, kind of cross-functionally across the whole organization.
Yeah, really, really handy for if you're trying to determine if it's safe to delete something, or find out how are people using this API I created, or how do I use this API someone else created?
Right.
Please show me
Right.
examples.
So the further extension to this is that we're going to be able to say, I just ran this run find recipe here, but I could also create a recipe, like create a refaster style recipe. And what that's going to do is, and I think we've had in office hours on refaster templates, it's going to create a declarative recipe where we give an example of code, and we've abstracted away what print stream means. In this case, we're saying this would match on any print stream, including system.out.println, and for any string, regardless of whether that's a string literal or it's a binary concatenation or it's a method call that returns string. And so this is really a recipe. It's intended to help start building a recipe from an example of a piece of code in the IDE. So if I stop this one over here, or maybe it's actually already done, and I compile this project here, we'll note that there's a run configuration button here now. and I can just run that recipe directly from the IDE. That's running also on all of these repositories that I've decided to add as part of my working set. So it's running right now on Spring AI, but and again, these results are going to come in kind of incrementally here. I'm going to stop this one actually because like that we've already kind of seen that. Let's do the slight
It's going to
variation on
behave
this.
very similar to the search version of the recipe we just ran, since it very much at the same kind of starting point for them.
Right. Right. So here's the other variation on this, which is to say, select a method and say, refactor, create open rewrite recipe. There's a shortcut for this as well. And I could say create refaster style recipe. And now I've got something very similar, but notice I have an after template here. So the question is, what would I want to do? And maybe like, let's just to provide a simple example, like let's say I just want to add the word hi to every println statement, add, hi to every println statement. Because we are friendly and we like to greet people.
After we say the thing to them.
That's right.
You end each of your statements with hi, the friendly way.
That's
Yes.
right. That's
Jonathan,
right.
this is a very small thing. Can you click the hide button on that StreamYard.com as sharing your screen pop up kind of
Oh
in the
yeah,
middle of the
absolutely.
screen?
Didn't know you could see that.
Oh wait, okay, there we go. Very good.
There we go. Yeah. Yeah. So the if I click run on this now, let's run this one because this is actually now not a search recipe, right? It's a transformational recipe. It's one that's we're starting to make a modification. And remember, none of these LSTs that we're going to be running on, like none of the code is on the machine. We were working with pre-built LSTs. We're not having to go through that whole compilation step to parse the LST. And so the intention here is to provide a really quick turnaround experience when developing a recipe to see it operate on many repositories and get quick feedback on whether or not it does what we expect. So here, the results are coming in for these searches or for these changes also in an incremental fashion. And we can see, sure enough, we found a sysout statement and we added hi to the end of it. So this diff view is for a diff of a file that we don't even have on disk, right? It's just, it's.
How would I take this diff and turn that into a patch or a change if I was like, yes, this is great. I do need a hi added to the end of every.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's where I think this plugin is a very new thing for us and under rapid development. Notice the actions up here just are in like rerun and stop. But this change view over here was designed, in fact, to use many of the same components from the IDE that we're used to seeing in the commit view. And you see how there's this commit message and commit and push and all these kinds and apply, So I think we'll take this window right here and we'll put it over here to the right. And effectively we'll add a command to mod CLI that hydrates a previously metadata only cloned repository on disk, but only if there's changes. Like I only need to clone this. I don't need to clone this one. There's no change to it. I would hydrate this one and this one and this one and this one. And then I could do a mod. We already have a command for mod get apply, which takes the results of a recipe run and actually applies them to disk. And then we could do a commit and push.
Right.
And so with a kind of like one tweak away from adding, mass committing to this experience as well.
So we had Olga ask, how can you use this if you don't have a Moderne tenant with LSTs already set up?
Yeah, that's a great question. So here in the settings, if we go back here, you notice I selected the Spring org. I could also select a local folder. So I could just select any folder. I could name it. And so on my machine, this has been always the way I've operated for some time. I always just have this projects folder, and underneath that'll be GitHub, and so under that is a series of GitHub organizations, and so under Spotify is one project. And so if I went to Spotify here, I could do mod build dot, and it's going to find the one repository sticks inside of it, and it's going to build that LST. Now we're effectively paying the cost of this compilation of this LST once, right? By, you see that the mod build is executing Maven right now. It's detected it's a Java 11 project, so it's going to build that LST with those tools, and it's going to continue on until it builds that LST. And now then I could configure the Spotify folder as a multi-repo over here in the IDE and start running impact analyses on it and so forth. So
Gotcha.
that's kind of the intermediate step.
Yeah, very convenient. Even if you had a Moderne tenant or DX set up with a fully populated organization view, this makes it very easy to, in an ad hoc way, define, well, I want to run on these 3 repositories. I don't have a name for them. They're just the ones I'm interested in at this moment in time.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And so I think where we go from here, there's a couple other areas that we mentioned, though, like commit options that will add to that run configuration. I think it makes a ton of sense. You'll notice that there was a run button there. There wasn't a debug button. A debug was a fairly complicated thing to add because the CLI is actually spawning a new Java process for every repository it runs a recipe on.
So they can't all be on the same port simultaneously.
Right. So we've got an actually experimental feature in the IDE that's just its own interesting little subject, where we've implemented JDWP, which is the Java Debug Wire Protocol, a JDWP proxy in the supervising Moderne CLI process.
I
And
see.
that
So you can connect to
proxy,
that one port, and then it points it to each of the processes that get spawned
that's right.
thereafter.
That's right. That's right. And so
Very
then,
handy.
and that will be handy both for the IDE to be able to a debug configuration to connect to a run on a multi-repository, but it'll also just be independently useful for mod CLI when you want to, just execute that directly and debug it.
Very, very handy for recipe authors who are, going to be running their
Absolutely.
code on a whole bunch of repositories. I mean, this really tightens the feedback loop on recipe authoring. From you have your idea, you start implementing your recipe. Maybe the test cases you come up with to start with are really good and comprehensive, but even if they are, there's probably things you missed that real code is gonna show you. And being able to not just run on all of those repositories but debug your recipe as you do it is just gonna mean kind of higher quality recipes right out the gate.
Right. There's two other big areas I think that we're going to see this plugin grow in, or two other directions. One is, if I go back to that Dev Center view from earlier and show that, where we had a particular organization and we're saying these are the priorities for this organization. Let's click into one of these. Like, let's say I click into Java 21 right now. And so we're running this recipe on 100 and something 40 repositories here. Super fast because of course we're horizontally scaling it over here on the single tenant SaaS.
Right.
But it's making all of these changes, right? It's recognizing I don't have to do this cast. I can use the named, instance of expressions that exist in Java 17 and get first, which exists in Java 21. Now imagine I had this repository, Netflix Curator, open in my IDE, and that I've configured Netflix as the multi-repo in my IDE as well. I can fetch effectively from that organization service the business priorities that are being set for that organization and pre-run that recipe on Curator, the recipe I have, or the repository I have open right now. And wherever any one of these changes exists in the IDE is an opportunity for me to surface the little like yellow intention action, the hint that says, hey, there's something to be done here. In effect, telling developers on that team, hey, just so you know, there's this organizational priority that we're trying to get you to take right now. You don't have to right now, but at a moment when it's convenient for you, fix it. And because we have this recipe running thing, you know how in the IDE, when you see a problem, you can say, fix this occurrence.
Mm-hmm.
or fix all, or I'll actually show one of those so it's more clear. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so suppose I go over here to main and I have like list S. Um, I don't know, this kind of thing. And it's going to say raw use of parameterized options. I could say, you know, run inspection on the whole project
Mm-hmm.
or just this file, or I could just fix this one occurrence. My
Mm-hmm.
intention is for the additional scope to be fix it on the whole multi-repo.
Yeah.
Because why not, right? So in effect,
Right.
then any one piece of a Java 21 migration is a
Mm-hmm.
signal to a developer that, hey, my organization is trying to get me to Java 21 right now. I can just fix all in my multi-repo at a time
Right.
that's convenient for me and fix it.
Yeah, rather than just being another item on the to-do list, actually get the to-do list
Do
item
something about
done
it.
for you. Yeah, do something
That's right.
about it.
That's right. Yeah, and that's what's partially exciting to me about that is that any recipe can be set as a dev center card, right? So we
Mm-hmm.
just saw Spring Boot, Java 21, JUnit 5, etc. But imagine an organization who's trying to migrate an internal library,
Mm-hmm.
or they have an internal, completely custom framework. They're writing
Yeah.
recipes for that. They could surface those recipes as an organizational priority. And now my IDE just became aware of business logic, like my unique business logic.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas previously, intention actions are limited to those things that are common to all of us.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, really, really powerful. And yeah, like you say, it's customizable. So even if your business, your organizational priority is upgrading Spring Boot, you could have it
Right.
run the like your organization's customized version of that recipe, not just the one we provide off the shelf in the open source module. One that includes updates for internal corporate libraries or internal code patterns that the open source recipe is never going to know about.
Right.
So yeah, that seems yeah, very powerful. So how can
So I
people who
don't
are
want you to
interested?
think that this is. We'll get to that in just a moment. I don't
Sure.
want folks to think this is limited to just Java code either. And I think there's another interesting area of development around just showing this. I've got the Spring multi-repo configured right now, but for a moment here, I'm gonna change this to the open rewrite org, which is the one I usually have selected because that's the code that I work on a lot. It's got 48 repositories inside of it. Already it's super helpful because wherever I'm like trying to remember how to use Java template, I can just go to any recipe that's Java template and say find all, right? And I find
Hmm.
all the usages of Java template across all 48 recipe repositories. Give me examples of how to use it. But we build all of our projects with GitHub Actions. So suppose I had, I wanted to find like all the pull request YAML tags. I could say find usages on all repos. I could, create this find key YAML recipe. And because I had selected a YAML key in the IDE, I can build a really context specific recipe that knows how to use JSON path to find that specific YAML key. So let's just do the find, which is effectively going to do just that. Hide this. Yeah.
So way back in the distant past, the very first version of a modern IDE plugin. Oh, there goes Jonathan. Maybe he can still hear me. Way back in the distant past, there was an initial version of the modern IDE plugin which would issue code searches to the SaaS in an
Right.
environment where you have like a modern SaaS and also the CLI running. Is it a priority at all to have the IDE dispatching recipe runs on the SaaS? Like as we saw earlier, because of the horizontal scalability you mentioned, you can get recipe results really fast from a large number of repositories through the SaaS, and running locally on the CLI is inherently, well, single machine. Do you think
Right.
we're going to have a return to that functionality in some way in the future?
I don't think it's likely, because well, I mean, I wouldn't like put it out of the possibility altogether. But
Hmm.
the other like area for development, I think that's likely to happen is we'll be enriching the LST binary itself to have
Hmm.
more like pre-indexed information about which methods are in use and so forth,
So
so
view
that we
search
can
is going
just
to be
skip
really
whole.
fast.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
It's never been something we needed to optimize for before.
sure.
Our search for that YAML key, by the way, the pull request, you can see these coming in, and we're able to see, the pull request branch is being built on all repositories across all 47 repositories right now. And, note that we're not just looking for the text pull request, but we're looking for the structure to be on pull request, and so it's really kind of interesting.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the benefit of having a rich model over a text search is that you can consider structure and path and hierarchy and sibling relationships
Absolutely.
and all of these things when doing these searches. And you need that context, that specificity when you're talking about hundreds of thousands of lines of code across
Right.
dozens of repositories that you have
Right.
varying degrees of familiarity with.
Right.
A search at any scale, it doesn't take that much noise before it's like unworkable. You don't have to
That's
sift through
right.
that many irrelevant results before you're like, yeah, this isn't even worth the trouble.
Or
I'm
if
gonna
it's
try something else.
incomplete, yeah,
Or
it's
if it's
just,
incomplete, yeah.
yeah. So that's where yeah, I agree. If I'm searching over a lot of things, I want a complete, no false positive sort of answer, and I
Right.
want it fairly quickly. But getting 100 millisecond response on a search for across thousands of repositories, I don't feel like is a necessary goal to achieve, as long as I get it in a reasonably quick period of time, like we are here. Um, I think in the end, um, not to put too fine of a point on this, but I think what you're seeing here is the beginning of the end of legacy code search products. I just don't see why developers would want a separate UI
Hmm.
for code search when they
Hmm.
already have a UI for code search, which is in their IDE. They use
Right.
find usages all the time. I use it all the
Right.
time. I just really want the same find usages view, but to incorporate potentially thousands of repositories I don't have open right now. And that's exactly the experience we're going for here.
Right.
Interestingly, Google wrote a book 3 or 4 years ago on Google software development practices. And there was a whole chapter, chapter 17,
Hmm.
on code search. And there's a section in there where they explain why they built code search into a separate web UI.
Hmm.
And the main justification was because, well, we can't wait for the IDE to index all of this code. We know how
Right.
it feels when IntelliJ goes into indexing mode, right? Where you're just like, oh, it's gonna be but that's on one repo. Can you imagine if I had to do that for 12,000 repositories? Like,
Totally.
I'm not gonna wait that long. So effectively, the LST is like an index in some ways,
Hmm.
but the IDE isn't responsible for producing it. It's already been produced. It's already in my artifact repository. I'm just downloading it, just like I would a binary dependency. And now, like, so in that chapter, Google kind of like almost tried to like backwards derive a reason why you would prefer a web UI, but really the like primary like motivator was
Was scale.
IDE indexing. Yeah. So I kind of feel now like if IDE indexing wasn't a problem, and it isn't with the pre serialized LST, then the
Hmm.
experience I really want is just where I'm living and working every day anyway in my IDE.
For sure.
It also
Yeah.
means I don't have to learn like a new syntax. I can just like select any example of an API and just say find. Like I don't
Right.
have
Yeah.
to
You don't
learn
have to
from
be
like
familiar with method matcher or
Right.
JSON path or XPath or
That's
whatever.
right.
You just like click on the thing you want and be like, find me these.
Right. Right. Or Combi or SemGrep or one of these others. Like just
Sure.
select the pattern and say, go find all things that look like that pattern. That's
Totally.
really the experience we want.
Totally. So how can someone who's interested to try this give it a try?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think today, sorry, I think as of today, we're opening up really like this period. This plugin is 3.10. I would consider it beta, but we're working with it every day and continuing to add functionality to it. So we're opening up a 60-day period where we're going to offer Moderne CLI licenses for free up to July 31. And the way to retrieve one of those really, we have a form here that I'll leave up, which is just at let me get the actual. Maybe we can post it in a comment a little bit later. There's a shorter form of this, just kind of a bit.ly link. I'm just trying to remember. Yeah, there's bit.ly/moderne IDE plugin. We'll put it in the notes here at the end, but Moderne IDE plugin. And we'll respond with a Moderne CLI license. The IntelliJ plugin itself you can get from the IntelliJ marketplace. So that the IDE plugin just requires a license CLI on the machine to function, and so that's what that key will give you for the time being. And yeah, we'd love the feedback and suggestions on where to add more functionality.
Yeah. One thing that comes to mind for me, yeah, and there's the link in the chat to the forum that Jonathan just mentioned. So go check that out. One thing that comes to mind for me is alongside the find usages is surely the most common like IDE search I use. Probably next most common is go to definition. Like I'm
Right.
going to a method, I want to go to its definition or the class that defines it. That seems like something that we could add, although you can't. That's a little bit harder to like guarantee that the definition would be within the set of repositories you had selected. Indeed, you would not be able to guarantee that the definition was
Right.
within the set of repositories you had selected. But in a situation like you're working on open rewrite and you're clicking on an open rewrite method, it's going to be in there. I can see that being a useful one, but then I'm
I also
just pulling
see a
ideas.
lot of things around dependency management coming into play
Yeah,
here. So I'm looking at a POM file. I'm looking at a dependency. So just find all the places that use this dependency either directly or transitively. It's recipes. Just upgrade this dependency. Why bother with upgrading on one repository when you could upgrade it on all of them? I feel like I
totally.
do that all the time. Like I think about something stupid like Nebula and Nebula Gradle plugins, and
Sure.
I'll be looking at a repository and it'll say like I'm pinned to 8.13.0 or something of a Nebula plugin, and I happen to look over and say, oh, there's a 8.15.0 available, and it's probably fine. And so while I'm making some other changes, I go ahead and rev that one to 8.15.0. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, well, I've got 90 other repositories.
Right.
Like, do I what
Do I
do I
want to
do
bite that
here?
off now?
Right?
Like
Like,
as soon
and
as
you
you
almost
it,
never do, right?
right, yeah,
So,
it's one of those things where you like, oh, this is a problem, let me fix it, and like, oh no, I'm pulling on a thread that's attached to
right,
all of our other stuff. Now I'm
right.
doing migration engineering. I have this
That's
cross-cutting concern across all of our
right,
repositories,
right,
and often it's like that's not what I was trying to do. I had some other
right,
objective right now that's more important.
right.
I'm just gonna put that little wart back where I found it. I'm
Yeah,
gonna pretend I didn't see it,
you didn't see it.
and
Yeah,
it'll be some other sucker's problem the next time they
right,
come through, and they'll
right.
probably do the same thing.
Right.
And that's
Yeah.
how
So
we.
just where my default mode would have been, yeah, I'll touch this one project because revving to 8.15 helps me with the thing I'm looking at right now. But, somebody else can figure that out on another repository later. I mean, I think my default action would just be like, let's just do it on
Let's
all the
fix it everywhere
repositories.
now.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
And you
And
could get into give a lot of people, or even just a few people operating in that mode. You get into a virtuous cycle
yeah,
where the little warts or out of date things just get zapped
yeah,
as they come up, and
that's right.
then just everyone kind of benefits from every dependencies being on the latest version, plugins being up to date, code smells having been addressed, and if nothing else, you don't face the like cognitive burden of making that decision or repeating that analysis, because now anyone who
Right.
comes after you doesn't have to run into the same problem that motivated
Right.
you to update that plugin version. They just get to continue focusing on the actually important thing they were trying to do.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
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 So the other area I think of, I know we've talked about a lot of things, sort of kind of like recap, like you can select a multi-repository on your local machine, kind of like a
Mhm.
like dependency resolution, run a multi-repository search, run a multi-repository refactoring operation, test recipe developments, more quickly, generate stub recipes for faster based or visitor based templates. Um,
Did we show a
the
visitor based one? I
I
think
don't
we
think
should
we did
refaster.
actually.
Let's do that real fast.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah. It's that's why we provided this menu, where you kind of get to select which form you want to start with. Like it may be that I just want to replace collections.singleton with list.of, right? In the
right.
example of like Java 17.
Mhm.
But maybe I just want to maybe I'm doing something more complicated, in fact, but I still
Right.
want to start the recipe by matching on singletons. And so here, this is actually a Java 8 project, which is why I have to do this. But like the recipe, I've generated a visitor based recipe with get display name and get description and get visitor and a method matcher. And I've added the precondition and I've added the new Java ISO visitor and visit method invocation. And if method matcher matches, then what do I want to do? And this is where I could start writing my recipe now. And I feel like I've written this block of code a lot,
Yeah,
or
for
something
sure.
like it. And that's what we're just trying to get you a quick start to knowing all these little bits. And now I have the full expressive power of the visitor and the LST to do whatever I want with
Totally.
with that right now.
Oh. And as you have that recipe in your IDE, there, it's easy to go and dispatch it across the organizations
Exactly. So then I
that
just
you
go
have
and run.
selected.
Yeah.
Oh,
Then I just go and run.
no.
And so notice when I generated that visitor based recipe, I added a to do comment, but I also said search result.found, and which kind of hints at how we think recipe development is most effective, which is to start out with a impact analysis or search recipe and evolve it into a transformational recipe by just clicking saying search result.found. I find all the inherent variation in how that method is used across a large set of repositories. I can see that before I start writing the transformational thing. So I already kind of know in the back of my mind what variational complexity exists or doesn't
Right.
exist
Right.
in
When
my
you
environment.
generate that recipe stub, we also generate the beginnings of a unit test for the recipe. That's correct, isn't it?
Not just yet, although
Not
that
yet.
is, you can imagine,
Very
that is
similar.
also something we want to do. Like you can just as really kind of a separate action, which is,
Hmm.
select a particular piece of code and say, generate a rewrite run statement with Java and create this and add the parser class path and like all these things that people trip over
Hmm.
when creating unit tests. I think we could really kind of smooth over as well.
For sure. Yeah.
So yeah, thanks for pointing that out. And then I think the last area, or like one of the last areas we know right now, although this is a quickly evolving world, is in the CLI we have data tables. So in the data tables we have, just to kind of go back to the screen over here, when I run a recipe, um, let's look for one from yesterday. Yeah, so somebody ran a dependency insight for Gradle and Maven recipe, and then ran a visualization for its dependency usage. And this visualization shows the range of Jackson versions for different Jackson artifacts in use across this whole multi-repository. This visualization was produced by injecting a data table into that to a Jupyter notebook. So I've got 148 repositories. Let's say I'm looking for all the Jackson versions. I'm running this on, I'm just looking for all direct and indirect usages of one of those libraries. And I'll show you what the raw data looks like for this. I know we've probably done some other videos on this as well, but what I would like to do is surface this. I'm trying to remember view data. I think what we'll do is we'll take data tables and surface them like as in these data views in the IDE like this. So you'll see the rows and columns of data that's coming out of the data tables in the IDE next to the run. And then interestingly, the IDE already has like aggregating actions and charting actions built into it. So you could very quickly write impact analysis recipes that just emit rows of data about various things and just get that directly in the IDE and chart those results. So this is an example of one of these dependency insights. I'm finding that somewhere transitively, I'm getting these 3 Jackson or multiple Jackson versions in the project. If I cancel it and go to data tables, I could download all the dependencies in use as a table structure. And that would have a row for every Jackson dependency that I found and the version that I found and where I found it and how deep it was and all that kind of stuff, built in. And I think it's that row data that will just show in the IDE directly like this.
Totally.
Yeah. So that's the intention, I think. So this is the data table that was produced for that dependency insight. It's the group artifact version that was found, the scope, the depth, that kind of thing. So
right on. Yeah. Well, very cool. Anything else you want to say as closing remarks, or covered a broad range of
covered a broad range of things. I think we're really starting to come around here to pioneering, what it means to manage this multi-repository environment that we have. And it's the first time that I can think of where the IDE has been used to take multi-repository action. Like for the longest time, I just felt like those were fundamentally incompatible. Like IDE by definition modifies one repository at a time. So it's like,
and you could sometimes set up like load multiple projects in the same IDE window with like a composite,
of course,
like that.
Yeah,
it was a bit awkward, and it would almost like strain the resource limits of your machine, since it is just loading all of that simultaneously at a certain scale that's just no longer tenable.
Yeah, I remember being at and I won't name names, but you and I were at one of the major credit card companies in the U.S. and we, although there's only so many of those, I guess, but we were able to clone an whole organization, like mod get clone, as opposed to get clone. Get clone clones one repository. Or I was able to say mod get clone this senior vice president, and it was like 6,000 repositories in that person's scope of responsibility.
Yep.
And so to be able to say mod get clone person's area of responsibility, run a recipe, and then produce the impact analysis that says, hey, person, this is every single file that would need to change and how long it would take one of the engineers in your reporting hierarchy to do it by hand. Do you want to do this by hand, or do you want to really like develop the muscle of fixing this? Or maybe do you want to go back to the vendors that are supplying the libraries that you're using and say,
fix this for us.
Fix this for us, right? Yeah, that's
Yeah, produce a recipe with the next version of your software, or we're not upgrading to it.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. But yeah.
Yeah, good stuff. I kind of see this. You earlier described this as the antithesis of a monorepo, but I almost see it. I don't see it quite as an antithesis, but maybe a reapproachment of making a multi-repository environment have some of the conveniences that a single repository environment has.
Yeah,
Within a
it's
single repository, your IDE can search through everything, assuming your IDE can load it all up at one time and not crash.
right.
And I see
Right.
like the largest mono repos adopting kind of tacking towards multi-repo, finding ways to check out just subsets of it.
Yes.
Finding
Yes.
ways not to load the
Yes.
entire thing at once, which
Yeah.
starts to make it act more like a multi-repository
That's
environment.
right.
And
That's
here, if
right.
we add
Yeah.
tools to a multi-repository environment where you can address searches and changes to areas outside of just one repository at a time, you start to get back some of the conveniences and consistency of the monorepo environment. So I kind
Yeah.
of see this as almost convergent evolution towards a sweet spot of however your code is organized, monorepo or multi-repo, you will have the capabilities that you want in terms of code search and
Yeah.
effective transformation at scale.
It's an interesting point about monorepo actually is that we're working now with a couple organizations that have large monorepos of tens of millions of lines of code each.
Hmm.
And yes, the strategy to parse LSTs for those is to actually find ways of fragmenting those
Hmm.
monorepos into multiple non-overlapping sets and producing LSTs for each, and then considering the whole set of LSTs when you want to make a cross monorepo change. But like maybe I don't always have to do a cross monorepo. I just want to change it in this one area. And
Hmm.
not surprisingly, in those monorepos, there is structure to them, like
Hmm.
inherently, it's not just all one big ball.
Hmm.
So yeah, we're kind of operating on both sides of this, like pulling monorepos closer to multi-repos, multi-repos closer to monorepos. My old it's not old, my former manager, I should say, at Netflix, Mike McGarr, when we first started working on Open Rewrite there, said that the experience here we were trying to achieve was the eventually consistent monorepo,
Yeah.
the feeling that like we do want to be able to do broad scale refactoring across the organization, but we don't want to have to coordinate that change so that it arrives all at the same time.
Right.
And I think that there is an interesting social element to that of, when in like heavy monorepo cultures, they tend to have a lot more code review
Yeah.
overhead, which may be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how you see it. Um, because hey, any given change could have like large scale
Broadly
impact
disruptive.
on,
Yeah.
yeah. So it changes the team culture when you do that, and it can be good and it can be something you don't want. So it's I like that optionality. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. All right.
But
Well,
well,
good
thanks for
discussion, John.
hosting again, Sam.
Thanks for joining me.
Yeah.
And we'll see everyone again next week. I don't know what the topic is off the top of my head, but I'm sure it'll be good.
That's right, of course, as always. Yep. See you soon.
Thanks a lot,
Bye now.
everyone. Bye now.